Welcome to Refresh. This is our time to connect, to be inspired, to learn a little something from each other. And in the Generation W spirit, when we leave each other this time together, we'll be a little bit better off, maybe a lot better off. All I can say is we're so blessed with the amazing people, especially women and girls who are part of the Generation W community. This is our fourth refresh. We've been growing grandly every single week. If you recall, if you've been with us, we laughed with Dr. Heidi Hanna and Michelle Gainless in week one. And then, oh my goodness, the amazing actress Tina Lifford. She taught us all about inner fitness. And then last week, of course, the resiliency of Marla Wynn going from riches to rags and now to riches again in terms of her developing fashion business, which is actually quite successful. And then this week, yet one more amazing woman. And like, listen, all of these topics are the things that are of interest to us that we feel like can help. Her most recent title was Managing Director of Employability Solutions and Services at Pearson. And honestly, that sounds boring, but there is nothing boring about Leah Jewell or the work and relevance of what she does. And I love the fact that she joined us at Generation W this past year because we're all concerned about the future of work and especially now. So Leah, just you tell us a little bit about you.
Well, sure. First off, thank you so much for having me. I can't tell you how excited I am to be here to have this great conversation and refresh again on what I think is a really important topic and what a concern to a lot of people. And my only regret is that Marla, the session last week you had with Marla was so fabulous. I wish Marla were here to dress me so that I would look better for this Facebook Live event. But since
by the way, we're taking that clip right now. We're going to send it to Marla, and I promise you, for wherever you go from here on in, you will be in Marla Wynn fashion.
Fantastic. Wow, that's a win for me. Well, I will say you're absolutely right. My title did sound super boring, the title, but the work itself is fabulous. And my background really is about 30 years in learning and education, and really the last several years have been focused on work and the future of work. You know, how do you connect with the learning that you have to your careers and the jobs of the future? So obviously there's a lot of relevance, you know, to what I think is going on right now in the world.
Well, I'd say the last time we were together, we talked about several things related to the future of the work. You want to just give us like a top line highlight of what that is?
Well, I think, you know, I always like to start out when I think about work, about sort of the timeline of work, right? And one of the examples that I use a lot is to say that, you know, there's a lot of evidence out there right now that says that people are going to live to be about 150 years old or have the potential to live to be about 150 years old. So if you just do a little bit of a back of the napkin kind of math on that, right, you're you know, in some sort of formal learning environment for 20 years, you're in another, you know, maybe you're retired for 20, 25 years. That's like 100 freaking years in the workforce, right? And so
people are really worried about their jobs, but when you say 100 years in the workforce, you're like, wait a second, let me rethink that.
Yeah, exactly. And I always think like, oh, thank goodness I'm not in that, you know, I'm not in that demographic. But I think that, you know, even right now, people have an average of about 12 jobs in the course of their life. And, you know, and it'll be very interesting to see how, you know, this pandemic that we're living through right now. And when we come out of the backside of this, what that means, you know, for work and for jobs. What we know, and that I find very interesting is that the skills that people are going to need are, it's a mix of hard skills, soft skills, but the human skills are really so important. And, you know, and I shared some of the research with you a year ago about if we looked into the future in the year 2030, what are the skills that people are going to need? And those are largely human skills, you know, communication, critical thinking, social perceptiveness, things like that. But if you even look at the requirements, generally speaking, and the needs that employers have had, even currently today, those are also largely human skills. And everything from adaptability to persistence to time and management, right? Things that as a human help you work with and alongside the technology, right? Especially since the technology is really impacting the jobs that are available to people.
Right. And you know, listen, work today, clearly, we have to talk about the situation today, right? It's so interesting. We had this conversation we did a year ago. We had it a couple of months ago. I was just on a call yesterday about a lot of our women mentees and my colleagues. The anxiety about work, the workplace, what it means, it's transformational, how the pandemic is transforming all that we do. And what's everyone's question? Like, what is it going to look like? And I'm not going to suggest that you know that, but I think you have some interesting insights into how the pandemic is accelerating some of the trends that we're seeing in the workforce.
Yeah, I mean, let's all be honest, right? It is a very scary time right now. And I certainly don't have all the answers, but but there are a lot of things I think that were happening prior to this and that will still be really important, like those uniquely human skills. And then we're just going to see some things just accelerate. I mean, when I was with you guys a year ago, I talked about how the robots are coming, and everybody gets scared about the robots are going to come to take our jobs. And we think, and the answer to that is, yeah, they are taking our jobs. And that is likely to accelerate probably even as we're coming out of this pandemic, because that typically happens. There's a strong correlation around the recessions and technology impacting jobs. But I also think that what we're going to see is, I think we're going to see a shift in jobs. I don't know that anybody knows that we'll have the same number of jobs. I mean, certainly unemployment right now is super scary to me and to everybody else. But just even recently, we've seen a shift, like 800,000 jobs have shifted to different sectors, healthcare, transportation, you name it. So, you could look at this as maybe not complete doom and gloom in terms of everything is about a job destruction problem. It could be that what we're going to see is a lot of job transformation that's going to happen in the next several years.
Well, I guess that sounds good, right? People want to know there are jobs, but as you know, we kind of, you said two things that are really interesting. I mean, just two things, but we have 12 jobs, right? I don't know about your dad, my dad, right? They had one job. Like, that was the goal. And I remember this great story from this woman I met who came from the West Coast. I live on the East Coast. And she talked about her resume, because she worked in the tech sector 15 years ago, had all these different jobs, 1 year, 2 year. And when she took her resume to the East Coast, people were like, oh my God, she's so fickle, we can't hire her. So this view, we have to change the view. And I think the millennials have brought that, and now the next generation behind that, the idea that we will have multiple jobs and they might not be all stacked up, right? It could be zigging and zagging over a career of all of this learning. We have to embrace the fact, right, about we have to continually retool. Yeah. If we're a robot, we have to retool.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you just hit on so many there's so many interesting points to unpack on, in that statement. And I think one of them is that you're absolutely right. I mean, whether we live a longer life, whether you have all these disruptions to the job market, the main thing is we're going to have to constantly upskill and reskill in our life, constantly. And this idea that you go to school for a certain period of time and then you're done with it, and then it's kind of like, oh, okay, I'll just go and do a bunch of jobs after that, is not, it's not a very productive way for us to think about it, right? And I think the more that we can wrap our head around the fact that we're going to have to constantly be looking for what are those skills that we're going to need, whether they're hard skills or whether they're human skills, how do we continue to develop them? How do we continue to show people that we have competency and expertise in those skills? Because the degree is one way to show that, but how, I think it's good. There's going to be a lot of interesting work around what are the other ways to show that somebody has competency in a particular skill. And I also think we're just going to see, I'm going to be very fascinated to see what happens with employers, right? Because before the pandemic, there was a huge issue with them not being able to find the right skills, and there weren't enough people out there, right, for the jobs, right? And now I think we're still going to have this gap around them not being able to find the right people with the right skills, but we're going to have like a lot more people looking for jobs. So how do employers sort of come out of this thinking about different ways to evaluate competency, different ways to analyze and look at skills, and also recognize that they might get somebody at a certain level with a certain set of skills, and then they can develop them, as they go through those jobs. I was, one of the things that was so fascinating to me was knowing that Google was hiring high schoolers.
Yes, I heard about that. Actually, I had a friend of mine, and it wasn't you, the friend, who called me and said, let me just tell you what's going on. But Google is going right to high schoolers and hiring them and saying, you don't need college, we're going to train you. Wow,
right.
Like what a shift.
Right. And if you have that before the pandemic, right? I mean, some of that may have been, well, we just didn't have enough people with the right skills and they felt like they could go to get them earlier on. But I think there was even more to that with what was happening there, which is that they were saying like, look, you're going to be in for a lifetime of learning, right? So you can come get a job, do some work. And then, hey, if you want to go back to school, go back to school. You want to get another skill, we'll help you get another skill, or you'll learn it on the job, or you'll go learn it someplace else while you're working. And I think the flexibility of both employers to sort of think about it that way, work and training and upskilling and reskilling, and also for people who are in the job or who want a job, being able to sort of wrap your head around those kinds of models, that kind of way of learning over the course of your life, I think is going to be even more important as we come out of all of this.
All right, so hold that point because it's really nice. We want to say, first of all, our friend Jen Rosenthal, which is, I think I mentioned her, Melinda Wolf, or how we met. They're former colleagues of yours at Pearson. So she's here on the North Fork of Long Island, and we're saying hello to Jen. And Reggie Lynn, and Diane Reynolds, and Marianne Hill-Jacob. Jacoby, I'm sorry, Maureen Elizabeth, Rachel Sumner. We just like to say hello to these people, and they're posting questions. So the first one, and you touched on this, you're talking about skills. So how do you best create a resume that highlights the skills versus the number of jobs? And it's interesting because the employer has to be looking at it that way too.
Yeah, and I'll actually kind of tell you a little bit of a funny story about that. I think, so there's a lot going on in that front, right? There are technology companies who are helping people understand what their current skill set is, and then how do you sort of demonstrate that to an employer. So I'm really optimistic that there's a lot more work that's being done on that front from a technology perspective. I think employers, there's a lot of work on the employer front that needs to happen. So if there are employers out there, I encourage you to really jump in and try to think this through, because unfortunately, I think employers still tend to not do a particularly great job with job descriptions. They tend to put in lots and lots of requirements because they can. Because it's like, I can ask for 100 different things and, let's see who pops out of the system on the back end. And that has the potential to get worse in the future, right? If you have more people looking for a job. So right. I'm hoping that there's going to be a lot more rigor on the employer side of actually understanding the baseline skills and doing that. I think there is a lot of work to be done around how do you show that you have competence in a skill. And what does that look like? Whether it's artifacts, videos, whether it's, literally examples of your work. I mean, I almost think about it like a portfolio, right? People think about artists having portfolios, but I think the future of work, you're going to have workers who are going to have portfolios of their skills to be able to show, I know how to write, I know how to give a speech, I know how to work in a team, all of those kinds of things, right? That illustrate the human skills as well as the hard skills. So I think that there's a lot.
You kind of laid this out. It's a little bit of an eye chart, but I know with your commentary, it can kind of tell us, okay, what's value today and what do we think is going to be value tomorrow? And I don't see technology here as a call out. Interestingly, I guess you can achieve these skills through technology, but I'll leave it to you, Leah. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, this is really just about, I sort of had this to sort of illustrate that on the left-hand side are the predictions of what those skills look like in the year 2030. What are you going to need to be functional in a job? And then the other side is sort of what are lots of employers looking for today? And so you see the mix of the hard skills and the human skills. And so your question about how do you show somebody that you are good in this, right? In the past, the de facto way to show endorsement for skills was your degree. But employers are seeing that that's less and less a real good indicator of whether you have these skills or not. It's hard to show that you have those skills coming. It's a lot of the human skills are not sort of necessarily illustrated. And that's why I think this portfolio of work is going to be really important. And I also
think, you know, everybody should just, this screen is like a really informative screen. You should take it, and there's so much. I mean, this could be a whole college course on this. But I would take a screenshot and spend some time, and we can follow up at some other time and really talk about this, right?
Yeah, and I also think, you know, when I think about skills like this, I also think that people can demonstrate their skills by unpacking their own personal stories, right? So if you think about flexibility, agility, time management, collaboration, you know, things that we're having to live through right now, right? We're all having to be more agile, manage our time more effectively, collaborate in different ways, right? So one of the things I think is interesting for people to do during this period of time is to start to think about your own personal story and how that reflects on these skills. How
Right.
have you, you know, and because you don't necessarily have to have an academic piece to show that you have competency in something, right? Some of this is about unpacking just your own personal life and the challenges that you've overcome.
Right. And it's interesting when it comes, this is very personal for you too, because you are in this stage as well. You are currently between jobs looking for something, but I want to come back to that because there's a lot of really good questions here. I love this from Rachel. Rachel says, and I think you've addressed it, but I think it's worth calling out that the conversation is often woman, man, human versus machine, not human plus machine equals growth. Right? It's like this either or battle. We're looking for the genius of the and, right? The robots are coming to take our jobs, but truthfully, we're creating the robots and those are jobs and we have to manage the robots and, you know, quality control the robots. I'm just curious, what's your thought on that?
Yeah. Hi, Rachel. Thanks for the question. I think yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It really should be an and proposition. I think almost everything in life should be an and proposition, right? Not an or proposition. So how do you know, they are not mutually exclusive. In fact, the fact that you can develop the human skills is what allows us to work with and alongside the technology, right? And that's what allows you to not be replaced by the machine, right? You have the skills that enhance what the machine is doing, that make it better, smarter, or what have you. So I think that's the way to think about those skills. And it is all about, you know, how do you work with all of the things that are changing in the ecosystem today?
Okay, now Jennifer, and there could be many Jennifers. Oh, Sarah Elliott just popped up. Hey, Sarah. If Google is hiring kids, which we know that they are, at a high school, are they implementing programs to keep employees more than a year or two? Because we know in Silicon Valley in particular, it's job hopping all the time. A lot of it's competitive, correct? You know, people are like constantly. But do you think she's asking? Do you think there'll be a shift from job hopping, like creating some stability in a place that truly develops talent and keeps you?
Well, I can't comment specifically on sort of the Google and what the Google policies are, but if I were an employer today, I would be spending a lot of time thinking about how am I going to help my employees upskill and reskill, and you know, how am I going to help them think about learning, both the modality of learning, the outcomes of learning, when they learn, how they learn. All of these things are things I think that employers are really having to try to figure out right now, because it's also super expensive to hire a new person and train somebody new versus upskill and reskill a person who's already in a job. And so I think there's just what I hope continues to happen is that we see employers do a lot more on the front of making sure that there's lifelong learning for all their employees.
Right, which is an investment in time and all that, which is interesting what the pandemic is giving us now, right? It's like I hopped on a call with Eric Schmidt, and I hopped on a call with some astronaut just because I could and I want to learn. That's probably a skill that we need to teach kids younger. But let me give you this question. Oh my God, Wendy Borland is here. That's so nice. Sarah Elliott. She wants, and we know Sarah, maybe you don't know Sarah, but I love Sarah. She says, what are your thoughts on company assessments like the CCAT? I'm not familiar with the CCAT test, and they require that. Is that something you're familiar with?
Yeah, well, I'm super familiar with employer assessments, and there's a wealth of employer assessments that are out there that measure everything from hard skills to things like critical thinking, right? And different companies have different philosophies about whether they are useful, whether they are valuable, and some people even wonder if they, I don't want to say legal, but whether they are not discriminatory. So there's just a lot that's caught up. There's a lot of pros and there are some cons associated with assessments, and I think and it just varies from company to company, state to state, job to job, skill to skill. There's no sort of one size fits all or one thing that's always good or one thing that's always bad. But I do think that we do need to have a way, again, to validate and understand whether somebody in fact has a skill and at what level do they have a skill. And so I think there absolutely is a role for assessments, especially ones that have been tested and are rigorous. Not everybody wants to take an assessment. Not everyone is capable of taking an assessment, right? So I think there are a lot of questions around
inequities.
Thank you. There's just a lot. This whole thing is bringing up lots of questions around, obviously, inequities, but that plays itself out as well in the assessment realm too.
Okay, so here's another good question. And by the way, it's Dr. Bourlabi, and I should ask her in front of all of us, and she'll join us. She is a performance coach for the Chicago Bulls, and she's celebrating this monumental year, and she's just wonderful. So we say hello to her. I think you guys met.
Yep.
Samantha Orender, she wants to know what you think about what the day office structure will change. Will it change after this? I think we're all kind of asking that. Or are we really going to all be sitting on Zoom calls for the rest of our life? Please say no.
Yeah, I know. I don't know. There might be some people out there.
I love our Zoom calls. I love our team, and they're all watching and they're all helping. And I truly look forward to that. It gives us the ability to connect in a way we don't in the office. On the other hand, our Elizabeth gave us the article about Zoom fatigue, and we're all, I think, experiencing that a little bit too. Other than I just get to look at you, but I'd love to be able to see everybody, but that is straining on the brain.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Samantha's question.
Yeah, well, I mean, the best part about Zoom for me is that I have this crazy plethora of backgrounds now that, I think I spend more time just coming up with cool Zoom backgrounds than almost anything else. But besides that,
you're a designer, put that in your portfolio.
But besides that may not get me too far in the work world. I do think, I was reading the other day, I think the World Economic Organization had said that something like less than 30% of the people really actually have jobs where they can work at home, right? So, I mean, sort of full-time, at home. I think it's gonna be very interesting to see what happens. I've worked full-time in an office. I've worked full-time at home, pros and cons to both. I know people that will cherish the opportunity to continue to work at home for the rest of their lives. And they're, and if anything, they're pissed that their employer told them they couldn't, and by God, now they can, type of thing. Like, oh, you told me I couldn't do this remotely. But look at me, I'm doing this remotely now. So I think there's some real interesting, dynamics playing out on that front. But there are going to be I know a lot of people that want to work in an office environment. And even if they could do it remotely, would prefer to be with their colleagues and work. And, I think it's going to change. I think it will open up I think it will provide more flexibility for people. That's what I'm hopeful of, that if you want to stay at home, you have the ability to work from home. If you want to go in an office, there'll be all the security precautions, that are going to be necessary for doing that, but that you have the ability to do that. And I think that that's what employers are desperately trying to work through right now, is what does that look like when they need to bring people back?
Right. I'm going to ask you another question, and while I do that, Sherry, prepare the first clip, if you would, which is the impact on technology. I mean, the impact on work. But I'm going to ask this question from Beth Reese-Cravey. She happens to be a writer for the Jacksonville Times Union, Florida Times Union. She wants to know, can you define upskill and reskill? I think that's a great question.
Well, I'll give you just the layman definition of upskill, reskill. So upskill means that I have a skill and and I've got to take it to a different level, or I've got to move it to an adjacent, sort of place. And reskill could mean that let's say I am, a project manager today and I want to go into the healthcare industry, right? I'm completely changing my occupation, my vertical. That's a reskill, right? So I am now having to completely shift my direction into something else.
Okay, and it's funny, I want to say, Beth, is that okay? And I'm looking at the screen, but I'm sure she heard you. So you're going to drastically change when you reskill, right? And upskill means you are working on a certain aspect of a business and you're going to continue to upgrade your technology. Usually it's technology, but your knowledge in that space.
Yeah, or an adjacent space.
Right, so for all of us from Generation W, we now have become a collective IT department. We all think we're very proud of ourselves for actually upskilling our abilities, especially Stacy, because we've had to. And speaking of we've had to, I'd just like to share this little clip from Gen W with our audience.
In fact, there's going to be a lot of other factors that are going to impact our jobs as well, including technological change, globalization, demographics, environmental sustainability, urbanization, inequality, political uncertainty. There's a lot of stuff that's going to change the future of work. It's not going to be just technology.
Okay, so you look at that, right? Brilliant in all, and like, oh my gosh, it's like you're on this railroad train, it is on the track, and the track just went like this. And as I look at even every single one of them is being redefined by this experience now. I mean, we had to redefine it in terms of its impact on work, but obviously political situation is changing, but it's changing every single day, right? Urbanization, I've read so much recently about how all of a sudden people are thinking about not being in the cities, whereas there was such a push to the cities. Is that sustainable? Is that really what's happening? I guess we really don't know, which is why we all are living in this kind of haze in a sense, trying to, work our way through it.
Yeah.
But I didn't see pandemic on that list, by the way.
Yeah, I know you and I were joking about well, let's see what was missing from that list. Pandemic would have been at the top of the list. But yeah, I think that is, it's obviously affecting everything. You're right. So some of the trends that I think we were seeing a year ago, how many of those sort of reverse, right? Urbanization is just a perfect example of that, right? If everybody's moving in now, is everybody all of a sudden, actually, I don't want to do that. So, I think there's just it's going to be so fascinating to see what literally changes.
And I think what most of our community is asking, and most people is, okay, it's happening. We don't want it to happen to us. We want it to happen with us. So how do we become active participants? And I think that ties in so nicely to really the other part of your expertise, which is vast, and that is in education and learning. Right? So it is upskilling and reskilling, but you do have an expertise in terms of how do we participate in the learning environment that helps us be a more active and knowledgeable participant actually in our own lives.
Yeah. Well, when I think about the time that we're going through right now, and obviously learning and education is changing. My son is in his room next door. Well, he's sleeping in next door, but he probably,
he must be a teenager.
Yes, but there are moments when he gets up and we think he's doing his online homework. But anyway, and going to online classes. But we would never really know. I think though that this is an interesting time for us in terms of learning. And one of the thoughts I have is if you're out there right now and maybe you have a job and maybe you have some time on your hands, maybe you don't have a job because you've been impacted by all of this. this is a really good time to sit down and start to not only explore different things, but do some learning yourself, right? And so much learning is free right now. So much, so many people, there was a lot of free learning out there before, but even more now because people have opened it up quite a bit. And I think this is a great opportunity if you have time. And I appreciate the fact that there are a lot of people who are juggling, 5,000 things, including little kids.
I thought I envisioned this time so much differently. I'm grateful and blessed, but I really did.
Yeah. So I'm cognizant that not everybody is sitting at home with time on their hands, but if you have the ability to have, to carve out some time, now is a great time to start to think about, okay, what is that skill that I would like to get better at? Is there a new skill that I would like to learn? Go take some online classes, go reach out to people that that you think are very good in those skills, and see if there are ways that they can mentor you. I think those, and also start to think about what are the artifacts that I can start to create that show that I have those kinds of skills. So there is an opportunity to really, to leverage some of this time to try to get out in front of some things when you get through it.
So I want you to reflect a little on your personal journey for us, okay? And then I do want to make a little pivot to higher education because we touched on that before, and I have a lot of curiosity. I think some of the people, clearly several of the people do as well. So just tell us a little bit about your personal journey here, because you are right in the middle of all that's happening. So this is not an academic exercise for you, it's a personal one.
Yeah, it is. I left my job thinking that I was going to be traveling around the world. That obviously got unwound. So those well laid out and thought out plans are no longer. And so, I have to say I'm kind of doing, I think I'm practicing what I'm preaching. I am taking lots of different classes, exploring lots of different varieties of things, partly, to be honest with you, an exploration, right, around what do I want to do next? How do I want to think about what that next move looks like? And so some of this for me is actually taking classes on things that I just am interested in. And yes, I'll be able to build a skill. I think I will be able to build a skill. May or may not be a skill that I will use in my next venture, but I'm learning and I have control over what I'm doing, which I think is really important. And I'm exploring. And I think, again, I appreciate the fact that not everybody is in a situation where you either have the time or the luxury to be able to explore. But if you are in a space where you are having to make a switch, either by choice or not, I think that if you can learn, explore, and connect with people, I think that's really important. So yeah, I don't quite know exactly what I'm going to be doing when I grow up, but I have had a lot of fun so far. It could get old after a little while, I think, but I have had a lot of fun so far, taking lots of different kinds of classes, also exploring what kind of learning works for me and what kind of learning doesn't work for me, right? Because there are some things that I respond well to and that are effective. And
that's a really good point. That's a really good point. Now, this is going back out to the macro a little bit. Like, what does all this mean to higher education? So when we were talking earlier, are we saying that college degrees, their value is waning? I know that you're a big believer in affordable education. I've just got 2 kids who graduated from big time schools. I'm a big believer in the social experience, an experiment that college is in addition to the academics. But what is this? I mean, what does all this mean?
Yeah. Well, higher education is obviously going through a lot. They're figuring out a lot of stuff right now, right? Independent of just the timing of when they go back to school. I think they're also they've had to pivot on a dime, and now all of a sudden all these courses are online. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in higher education. I think from a parent's when I think about it from my perspective as a parent, or if I think about it from a learner's perspective, a student's perspective, I am a big believer in college. At least up until now, the data still shows that you're more likely to, you know, make a livable wage and have better success if you have some form of a college degree. It could be a 2-year degree, could be a 4-year degree. I don't know that that's going to change. It certainly isn't going to change overnight. But what I would say, especially in light of the fact that there's so much ambiguity about what's going to happen in the fall, I think there are a few things that I would be thinking through right now if I were a student or a parent. One is, if they don't go back to school in the fall physically, and it's all online, I would definitely encourage people to continue to take the courses because it's time well spent. If you didn't know where you were going to go or what you were going to do, I would encourage people to look at online courses at community colleges. I am a very big believer in affordable education, because what you don't want to necessarily do is end up with a degree and then end up with a ton of debt on the back end, especially in this environment. So there's lots of good, accessible, inexpensive, very effective online courses you can take at community colleges that'll continue to move you forward. And I also know there's just a lot of people that are thinking about, kind of skipping a year almost, right? I mean, kind of like, what's the new gap year look like, if you will?
If you can afford it. We have one of my favorite organizations, the Red Coats. We have City Year, which is around the country. You know, the kids get a stipend and it's an amazing experience, but yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, and I think actually the concept of a gap year is potentially going to get completely redefined, right? I mean, gap year, it has, to your point, almost sort of been, I would say, more of a privilege in a way, right? If you could take advantage of that, but it could be that in this world where it may not be a choice to not go to school, right, in the fall, right? You may just not be able to go to school for certain reasons. Thinking about what you can do during that period of time, during what I would call that sort of that new gap year, if you will, I think it's an interesting concept and thing to think about, because that gap year could be work-based, could be project-based, it could be volunteer-based, it could be, based in piecemeal work that you get from employers, again, to help build your skills, to help show that that you've mastered certain things.
So I hate to say, this time has flown by. We got a little late start, and I have so many more questions that we all would love to ask. I'm going to throw this out just because you know me well enough, Leah, on our short amount of time. If in fact all of our friends now who are on Facebook watching or want to spend, let's say, an additional 40 minutes where we can dig in and we can have a conversation, let us know, send us your name, and maybe we'll just schedule a Zoom session, which will create a little more of the interactivity. Are you game for that?
Totally.
I'm learning as I go, and I'm learning from you, right? So we can do that. I'd love to do that. Rachel Tutwiler Fortune says, hi, Leah. We worked together when I was in America's Promise Alliance. How cool is that? By the way, she is the president of the Jacksonville Public Education Fund, and she works me so hard. She forces all of us to think about quality education. She's an amazing leader, but honestly, as I was thinking about this, I actually think that you would be so valuable to really work with that current work, probably all over the country. In closing, let me just say this, we so appreciate this. We want to ask everybody, leave us with 3 thoughts, 3 things that you think will help us as we move forward in our lives and feel refreshed as we depart.
Well, we've probably covered a couple of them, so I'll keep it quick. One is definitely do your best to think through how you can learn skills and just learn during this period of time. That I definitely think is one. And I think that the other is network. And now is a great time to be networking with people, to be connecting with people maybe you haven't been connected with for maybe 2 or 3 years, but were important in your life at one point in time. And certainly that is very important in terms of jobs and careers. So now is a perfect time to be networking and be talking to people and learning from the people who you're networking with. And then the last thing I would probably say, and it's something that I think about a lot, I thought when I was a manager, and I think about every day that we're in this right now. And that is, I think it's just called, or I've heard it references the Zorro circle, which is, draw a small circle around you, focus on the stuff that you can control, the stuff that you know, there's a lot of stuff that's going on out here that you cannot control. So, and it's easy to get caught up in all of that. But if you can just focus in on the things that you can control, you're going to feel better about what you're doing. I think you'll be happier, and you'll be able to move things forward. And I've always just felt like those are the things that I think about anytime I'm going through really difficult periods of time.
That's awesome. Like, yes, what we control. We can control being together now, how we feel about it, how we engage, and how we're going to feel refreshed. We can control all of that. There's a lot of positivity to following up on a more intimate conversation, so we can talk about that. Before we leave everybody, I just want to say, I haven't done this before, and I thought I should. Every Friday at 4, we have the virtual the virtual Gen Wow clubs. It's teen girls. It's been an amazing experience. I quietly sit in, although I have guested, to learn about what's on their mind, to help them know that they are not alone, that they are engaged. It's real powerful. We've had girls from around the country, although we have a strong base right here in Jacksonville with our Duval County Public Schools, our Orlando Public Schools. If anyone out there has a teen girl who would be interested in joining us, we want to invite them. There's so much goodness that we feel we must share it. So Generation Wow, again, just info@genwnow.com, I believe is our address, info@genwnow.com. And I want to thank Leah for being amazing, Leah. And it's like so much more to learn and remain connected. And that's, for me, for all of us, that's the beauty, to have you in the circle, as warm and wonderful and brilliant as you are. So again, thanks to Jen, because I know she's here and she made it happen, and that's part of the magic. And lastly, next week, let me share with you on our refresh, we will have Dr. Orender Johnson, another miracle wonder woman who actually is a professor of leadership at the United States Naval War College. She trains our military leaders to lead, and she's going to share her insights. Maybe, you know, Leah, you want to join us. She will provide her insights on personal leadership and what we can do to lead ourselves in this crazy time. And hopefully she'll have some fun stories for us, because like all of these great women, everybody has a great personal fun story. So we leave you with a little refreshment, if we will, and we'll look forward to follow whatever you're supposed to do on social media. Yes, yes, yes. And if there's anything we can do for you, that's our purpose. So take care, everybody, and thanks to the entire Gen W team, especially Sherry, our now technical director, Stacy, Ruth, Elizabeth, Jamie, Kasha, Tara, and of course Leah. Bye, everyone.